Heck.
I'll record it
Oh.
and we'll put it on the Hoboken Library social media. So either
Sounds
YouTube or
perfect.
Facebook.
Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Okay, perfect. So, okay, so let me just make sure you guys can see this. Yes? Okay.
Yes.
All right, so first let me introduce myself. I'm Jody Bloom. I'm the founder of Cornerstone College Solutions. We're part of a much larger financial planning firm, but the reason we created this was because when I came out of school, I came out of school with a lot of debt. I was raised by a single mom who raised myself and my brother, and she helped put us through school. And she too took on a lot of debt to send us to school. And at the end of the day, I saw how it impacted her in ways that, things that she couldn't participate in or do later in life because she had burdened herself with so much debt. So I really vowed to just help as many families as I can to learn how to save properly and to understand the financial aid system so that you can maximize how much the schools can give you. The other reason why I do this is because there's a lot of financial planners that say they do college planning, and really they don't do comprehensive planning. They are not asking what families' goals are. They're not looking at all the resources of a family. They're not talking about where it is best to borrow from if they have to borrow and how to get it paid off. They're basically saying, how much money do you have to save every month? And I'll throw it into one type of investment account. So I wanted to make sure that, our group really looks very comprehensively at a family and to figure out exactly what makes sense. All of us are different. We all have different children, different academic goals, different finances, and therefore no two plans will ever look alike, right? Everybody is unique, so the plan should be unique as well. This is my cell phone, this is my email address, and this is our website. So, and as I mentioned, somebody might put my Calendly into the chat room. If you want to sign up, I always make the offer to do some complimentary planning and consultation. So you can feel free to do that. No invoice is going to pass over the desk to you. This is just, an opportunity to see if there are some opportunities to optimize what you're currently doing or to create a new plan. Okay.
Jody, one question, if I may.
Yes.
I'm obviously late with my, I haven't done it for my senior at all. I'm an accountant, it's my tax season, so I'm late.
Okay, it's okay.
And I'm feeling very anxious and about it.
No, that's okay. You're okay because, what's that?
I mean, yeah, if you can tell me a little bit of the timing, I would appreciate it.
Yes, we're going to cover all of that. So,
Okay.
You know what, hold on to your questions and then we'll answer any of your questions at the end. But we're going to get to all of that for you. Don't worry, you're fine. The financial aid forms came out and became available October 1st, but it doesn't mean that they have to be in October 1st. Obviously, you want to be able to get them in as quickly as you can, but don't worry, you're going to be okay. And it's going to depend on a number of things. So we'll go over that in a few slides. Okay. And then if you could just mute your line since we're recording, and then I'll answer your questions at the end. Okay. All right, great. Okay. So why do families pay more for college? Because we really want to figure out what to do so we don't pay more, right? Well, there's this thing called college procrastination syndrome. And that's the idea that when kids are young, that they have all the time in the world until college comes, right? So they put off saving because it seems like it's so far down the road. But as I'll show you later on in the presentation, the earlier that people can start, the better. It's going to save people money by starting earlier. Failure to seek support from professionals. I would include that, myself in that. Sometimes people wind up paying more for college because they're not seeking advice or getting educated about different ways and places to save in that's going to help them to pay less for school down the road. Then lack of understanding of the financial aid system, right? We're going to cover a lot of that today. It's a very complex system, but there are some very pertinent points that every family should know so that you can, best plan and figure out how to, again, get the most out of the schools. There's a lot of money out there to be had. You just have to figure out the ways. And then failure to explore unique strategies to grow and protect funds. Sometimes people wind up paying more for school or wind up having to have penalties for where they have locked their funds up in. So we're going to cover that as well. So what do schools really cost nowadays? Community schools here in New Jersey, they range from about $5,000 to $7,000. A great opportunity for a family, no matter how they plan, are just not going to be able to send their kids to a 4-year bachelor's degree program and be able to afford it. So better that maybe they can get 1 or 2 years under their belts at $5,000 to $7,000 instead of a much higher amount. Also, great opportunity for kids who aren't sure if they're really cut out for school, right? Not everybody is. Sometimes kids need to figure out and have to spend some time to mature and decide what they really are interested in, and can do so. They can get a 2 years associate degree at one of our community schools and live at home and commute fairly inexpensive. Next up, as you'll see in the top right-hand quadrant, are the in-state public schools. It costs about $15,000 to $35,000 in New Jersey. Rutgers is $35,000, Montclair State is just over $30,000. So a good opportunity for families in New Jersey to consider some of these schools. But then next up on the bottom left-hand side are the out-of-state public schools. They are as low as $30,000, but as high as $65,000, even $70,000 now. We've seen the most increases in costs coming out of state schools across the country because a lot of states are cutting back on their funding for the schools. So an average public school is going to cost about $22,000. But really, when you are thinking about a New Jersey resident attending an out-of-state public school, the average is about $45,000 to about $50,000. And then the highest price schools are the private colleges and universities, ranging from about $45,000 to $80,000. Now, if you are thinking, I am never going to allow my kids to apply to a private school, I would ask you to keep an open mind, okay? All right, we all know what this is, right? I carry these around with me in my pocketbook and in the door of my car because I get them delivered to my house every week. It's a Bed Bath coupon. Because I've come to understand that I never ever have to pay full price for something at Bed Bath. I know I'm going to at least get a 20% discount. Well, the same thing goes for a lot of the private schools. If you, again, are one of those families that was thinking, I'm going to rule out those private schools because that's an insane amount of money to pay, just know that many of the private schools have larger endowments, deeper pockets, and they know they have to provide a tuition discount to become more competitive with the state schools and less expensive private schools. And very often, believe it or not, if you choose the right type of private school for your children, you very often can get the cost down to at least the cost of a state school or even lower. So don't rule it out just based on the sticker price. So average cost of school through the years, if you look all the way to the left, 1977 to 1978, cost of a public school was around $8,000. Cost of a private school was about $17,000. And as you can see over time, it has just continued to increase with really no end in sight. Back in 2017, 2018, the cost of a public school was about $21,000. Cost of a private school about $47,000. Right now, the cost of a public school across the country with all schools included is about $22,000, and it's just over, it's about $50,000 to $51,000 for a private school. So how does the cost of school stack up against all the other costs that we incur in our lives? I want to take a look at the cumulative percent price change since 1983. Okay, so as you can see, apparel's increased about 20%, gasoline about 106%, although I guess if we looked at the cost of gasoline today, this would even be even higher. Housing costs increased about 181%, medical care 435%, it's huge. But if you look at the bar across the bottom, tuition costs have gone up 822%. as a cumulative percent price change since 1983. So why is this happening? Well, there's a number of reasons. One, as I mentioned, a lot of the states are cutting back support for the state schools, the public schools. That's creating the need for these state schools to raise their prices. The colleges are spending a lot of money to hire really qualified faculty and administrative staff. They always like to see and hire faculty that is going to do a lot of research. That's very important to them, and that costs money. And then colleges are spending a lot more on their marketing dollars to try to attract the most, the best students to their student body. And then lastly, one of the other reasons is a lot of the schools don't have a real incentive to cut back costs because the government, for most families, will make loans available all the way up to the full cost of school. So they're like, hey, listen, doesn't matter what our school costs. Parents can always just borrow to send their kids. So that's another one of the reasons that it's increasing so dramatically. On average, year to year, the average school increase in costs is 6%. That far outpaces the increase in inflation. So we really have to understand that that's why it's so important to plan as early as you can so that, you're prepared for what's to come down the pike. Now, obviously, the younger the child, the more likely school is to cost. Here we're looking at, the cost of college and at different ages. So if you look at the second second set of bars at age 16, based on the average public school of 22,000, costs about $105,000 for somebody who's age 16 to pay for a 4-year undergraduate degree at a public school, $241,000 for an average private school. But if you look all the way, the third bars from the right, age 4, you've got about $189,000 for a 4-year-old is going to have to pay for a public school and about $433,000 for a private school. So it's a huge amount. Now that's only for one child. Imagine if you have 2, 3, 4 children. So it's so important for us to really figure out early on what the average cost of school is going to be. And different schools obviously are going to have different price tag. The place that I like to go to first and foremost is collegeboard.org because it allows you to compare apples to apples. Yes, you can go to the websites of these individual schools, but what can happen is that some of the schools are great, really transparent, and they're going to outline all the costs that you can expect. However, some of them intentionally will make it more difficult to figure out the cost of school. They'll show the tuition costs on the admissions page and the room and board cost on the housing page. And then maybe on the health services page, they might have the cost for the health services on campus. And there's a lot of hidden costs. So I like this. Just you can log on, key in the name of any college or university, click on the paying tab on the left-hand side. And this is the type of screen that's going to show up for most of the schools. I'm showing University of Maryland as an example. As you can see, you can click in-state costs. So for a Maryland resident to attend University of Maryland, it's showing that it's close to $28,000. This is including tuition and fees, room and board, books and supplies, and an estimate for personal expenses and even transportation. Now, College Board is pretty good at coming pretty close to the real cost of school. They might be a little lower, a little higher, a couple $100 each way, but it really just allows you to compare apples to apples, as I said. Now you can click the out-of-state costs, and you can see on the bottom left-hand side of the screen that a New Jersey resident is going to pay about $55,000 to attend the University of Maryland. Now, what are some of the factors influencing costs? Well, when I graduated from school or when I attended school, many of the schools would publish what they call their percent graduation rate. What percent of students are graduating within 4 years? Nowadays, schools are publishing a 6-year graduation rate. Why? Because, in fact, only 41% of students in the United States graduate within 4 years. Up to 59% will graduate within 6 years. That's an alarming rate, because if you think about the costs that we just saw on the previous page, I don't care if it's a state school or a private school or even a community school, every additional year, every additional semester that our kids stay in school longer than they're supposed to is going to hurt. It's going to hurt us for retirement, and it's going to hurt what we're able to do for subsequent children down the road. So why is this happening? Well, transfer rates have skyrocketed. There's been lots of large studies done. Wall Street Journal, National Student Clearinghouse, they all show that about 1/3 of all students in the US transfer, 1/3. Now, what happens when you transfer is that the second school is not always going to accept all the credits that your kids have earned at the first school they've attended. And of that 1/3 of students that transfer, 46 to 47% are likely to transfer more than once. So that can hurt. Choosing the wrong school or major, even inside a larger university, if you apply into a particular school, your child has their heart set on something, maybe they think they want to be an engineer, and they go into the engineering school and they work toward that for 2 years. And along the way, they say, don't really want to be an engineer anymore. Now they have to make a change. And all those prerequisite courses for engineering might not make sense for the new major that they're going to take on. So that happens as well. Veering off course. Some schools allow you to have a lot of flexibility. Look, as a parent of 3 children of college age years, I know that I want my kids, and I'm sure you do as well, that you want your children to go to school, find something they love to do, and come out and be able to make a good living from it. But sometimes if they have too much flexibility and they are spending a lot of time exploring, they don't rein the kids in quickly enough, and they may now have to sort of take a step back as they decide to finally declare their major. Most schools will require that they declare their major by end of their sophomore year, but nonetheless, they might be way off track and may not be able to figure it out. And then for those that are expecting that their kids are going to work a lot of hours to help make some significant contributions to the cost of tuition or the overall cost of school, some of those students are working too many hours to make, working so many hours to make ends meet that they're not able to take a full-time workload, yet they're still living at school and incurring those expenses. Or some of them are taking a full-time workload and working a lot of hours, and some of them have to wind up repeating classes because they're not able to give as much attention to those classes as they would have liked. So really, what do? We have to help them do due diligence, right? And when I talk about finding the right pieces to the puzzle, I'm talking about 3 different areas. One is academic. Obviously, you want to have academic choices for your children. So first off, you do want to hold the school's feet to the fire, call them up, have your students call. You can call the admissions department, attend one of their information sessions, and ask the question about what % of their students are going through school in 4 years, not 6 years, because you want to know that that school has a lot of people moving through the school and are nurturing the kids enough to move them along. Secondly, you want to identify a number of different areas that your kids might be interested in, so that if along the way they decide they want to do one thing and then they decide they want to do something else, maybe those 2 interests are already strong at that same school that they're attending. Okay. But socially, now I know this is a financial workshop and we're going to get to all the nitty gritty, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that it's really important for you to find the right social fit for your children, because if you don't, they're going to wind up making a change. They won't be happy. And when they make a change, it's going to, take a lot longer for them to get through school. And last but not least, that piece to the puzzle is the financial piece. I can assure you that you are going to be able to identify schools that will fit your budget, but you have to do and understand how to identify those schools and to figure out which schools will give you the most amount of money so that it can be the right fit. All right. Now, quickly setting up campus visits and doing research. Look, until your kids are juniors and seniors, you do not have to start having them attend information sessions and campus tours. And I am also not of the belief that if they have 16 schools on their list that they want to apply to, that they have to visit every school. However, I do think it is very important to have them narrow down their list and to visit certain schools and to make sure that they're showing some demonstrated interest. Prior to setting up those info sessions and campus tours in, junior, senior year, I think it's a good idea if you happen to be on a road trip with your kids, or you're visiting somewhere, or you're on vacation, and there's, a college or university in the area, start exposing your kids in 9th and 10th grade, even middle school. Just drive through the school, maybe get out of the car, park, walk around on campus, get a sense of the vibe at that school, maybe go in, have lunch in the student center. Look, it's very telling if you expose your kids early on to different types of schools, like an urban setting school, a large state flagship state school, like a big rah-rah campus, a small liberal arts school, or even a medium-sized school. You'll start to get an early sense of what really makes their heart race. When your kids do visit some of the schools, I do recommend that they call ahead to see if there's any interview possible. Sometimes schools will give the opportunity to interview with an alumni close to home, a great opportunity for them to have another look at your child and for your student to get, a little bit more information about the school. But some of the schools will actually have one of the admissions reps, maybe even somebody, newer, younger in the department doing some interviews. So definitely call ahead. Sit in on a class, ask them to call ahead to see if they can sit in on a class in an area of something that they're interested in. It's very telling about a school when they see how professors interact with the students and the students interact with one another during classes. And then lastly, just as a mom, I think it was a great opportunity when my kids were able to arrange to stay overnight on a campus that they were very interested in. You know what? The campus tours, they're given by students that work for the admissions department. The info sessions, again, admissions department. They will learn a lot and see a lot from the kids that actually attend school there. They'll see what it's like to eat in the dining hall and sleep in the dorm and see where they socialize. So I think it's a great idea. If they don't have a friend that attends that school, maybe you have a friend whose children attend. They can even ask their guidance counselor if somebody from their high school attends the school. So just a good opportunity to see a little bit more and learn more. Most important on this slide is that you have to remember that colleges are businesses, and I want you to forget the rankings. US News and World Report comes out and people get crazy. Where did the schools move? Up a few notches, down a few notches. Truthfully, at the end of the day, they probably have done nothing very different on campus than they did before, but they know how to, impact the numbers so that they can move up in the rankings. Perfect example, Tulane University they made their application free, which means that now they get so many more applicants for the same amount of spots, and it impacts their selectivity ratio. And that is one of the factors that helps to move them up in the rankings for some of these rating organizations. So it has nothing to do with Tulane. It's a great school, but you just have to know that they're making smart choices to influence how they rank. Okay. More important that you create a list of things that are important to your students and write out the pros and cons for each of these schools. Now, here we have a list of college resources. So let me just touch on this. When we're working with families, we're looking at everything. It's really important to look at every type of resource that they can have available to help to pay for school. And whether you have very little in some of these buckets or you have a tremendous amount, there are still things that you can do to make sure that your funds are growing the best they can, protecting some of them, being protected, making sure that you're looking at multiple ways of being able to access funds, because some of these resources have penalties associated with them. So let's just touch on that. So up at the top, you're seeing student parent investments and savings. So we're talking about not qualified retirement plans, but we're talking about any type of investment accounts that you might be doing outside of retirement funds. So mutual funds, anything with a brokerage account. Maybe you're investing in equities or bonds. Maybe you have some CDs or money market accounts, or even just savings and checking and savings accounts. That's all one of the areas that a lot of families often look to help support their college costs. Next are student loans, and we're going to talk about that on the next slide. But the college debt crisis in our country is tremendous. It's over $1.7 trillion. And I know we all have great high hopes of having debt forgiven, but it's a huge amount. And currently, less than 1% of all debt has been forgiven. And so you can't really necessarily count on that. And we're going to do our best to figure out, where is it best for families to borrow from each year. Okay. Then there's parent loans. So I just want you to think about, outside of your students borrowing, which by the way is very limited in what students can borrow on their own, parents are often looking toward a number of places. One, they might be looking to the government loans, which we'll cover on the next page, or even local banks. Again, we'll cover that. But families are often looking toward their own home or even their qualified retirement plans, whether it's a 401k, 403b, 457s, SEP plans, simple plans. Okay, so these are areas that people have in their minds for, okay, well, maybe I'm going to have to borrow out of them. Well, a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, when we first came out of school or we started our first jobs, people were telling us to save in these areas and save in your 401k as soon as you can. And, put as much away because, it's really important to save for retirement. And it is, but not in lieu of saving for college, because huge college costs are going to come a lot sooner than your retirement. And if you don't plan for that, it is going to impact what you're going to have available for retirement down the road. The other place is, as I mentioned, the home, right? Sometimes families will come in and we see that they're overfunding their mortgage, paying more aggressively to get their mortgage paid down, because we've always heard nothing better than having a home that's free and clear, right? Unencumbered, that's fantastic. And yes, again, in retirement, that's terrific. But there's a couple of things, because if you have equity built up in your home and you're counting on that equity for college, a couple of things can happen down the road. Maybe you're not able to refinance your house or to cash out of your home because perhaps at the time that you need to do that, maybe you're not working. Maybe you're in that situation, or maybe the interest rate environment isn't great, or maybe you were planning on selling your home to help pay for the cost of college, but maybe it's a buyer's market at that time, not a seller's market. So it's great to be paying down your mortgage. It's great to save in qualified retirement plans. Everybody should be. But again, keep in mind, it also you have to have some, college savings ahead of that. Okay. And scholarships and grants, that's on the bottom. That's the sweet spot. That's what we want to learn the most about tonight. How do we get more scholarships and grants and understand which schools are going to be most likely to give our children the most amount of money? And then gifts from grandparents or any extended family members. I wasn't as lucky in that area. So if you have extended family members saving on your children's behalf, that's terrific. I do want you to know that it is important to plan out when those funds are going to get distributed, because there's ways to do that can help your children without hurting them. Sometimes, people will be having a grandparent send a check directly to a school. They want to make sure that's where it's going, right? Well, that's like waving a red flag saying, hey, listen, we might be looking for some support from you, school. We're looking for financial aid or merit aid, but don't really worry about it because we've got a wealthy relative who's going to help support us. So you never want to do that. Secondly, if grandparents are saving in, let's say, a 529 plan, when they distribute those funds, it will show up as income for your students. And that can also impact how much eligibility you have for schools, for aid for the schools. So we always work with people to figure out the best timing for that. And then on the upper left-hand side, I show 529s and cash value of life insurance. So let me take these separately. These are two areas that people are often looking to save in for school. 529s are an investment account that was created in the late 1990s by the government. And they said, look, we're going to allow families to invest in an investment account to save money in there for college. However, and we're going to make an incentive there. We're going to make sure that we don't tax the gains inside of that plan, provided that the resources inside that 529 are utilized only for qualified educational funds. So what happens here, I've seen this a lot, is that families get so excited about the fact that they're not going to get taxed on the gains, but they do so much that they're overfunding this account. And then all of a sudden their kids might attend a less expensive school, or they may get more need-based or merit-based aid than anticipated. All of a sudden, they're stuck with funds in this plan. And now, if you want to access those funds for something outside of educational resources, you have to understand that you'll take a 10% penalty on that. Okay, so it's just something to keep in mind when you're funding a 529. The second thing about 529s is they're investment vehicles like any other type of investment vehicle, mutual funds, stocks, bonds. It's similar to like the types of investment vehicles that you're putting your 401ks into. And all of those have some market risk associated with them. Even if you're in an age-based fund that's going to get more conservative as your kids near the time of school, there's still a big risk. Back in 2008, when the stock market crashed and we saw like a drop in the market of about 37%, no matter how conservative some of these funds were, they got hurt. And if you were a family that had to be dipping into those 529 accounts or other investment accounts at the time that the market dropped, it compounded those losses and people were not able to recoup those funds, certainly not in time to be used for the cost of school. Okay, so just something to keep in mind. The last thing about 529s, because people get excited about them, and sometimes it does make sense for families to have them, but you do have to know that you will have to report them as a parent asset on financial aid forms. So just want you to keep that in mind. Another area that families will often save in is something called the cash value of life insurance. It's not the death benefit, it's cash that builds up inside certain types of permanent life insurance policies. So these have to be designed well in order to work well, but when they do, they don't get reported on financial aid forms. We're going to talk about that later. So just something to keep in mind. At the end of the day, you should have a diversified portfolio, and that's really important because you want to be able to have a number of different resources from, coming from lots of places, so that you can protect your family in the best way possible. So student loans. Students can really only borrow a limited amount on their own. I often hear families say like, well, look, if we have to borrow, no problem. I'm just going to have my kids take those student loans. But student loans are only $5,500 as freshmen, $6,500 as sophomores, and $7,500 in junior and senior year. That's all they're able to borrow and sign on the dotted line on their own. Now, these loans are called federal direct subsidized or federal direct unsubsidized loans, or you'll often hear them referred to as Stafford loans. Now, what's the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized? They both carry with it the same interest rate. And right now, just so you know, all the student loan rates get published in early July 1st. And it's based on the high yield treasury auction that occurs in like late May. So this year, for this academic year, 2021 to 2022, the interest rate associated for both the subsidized and unsubsidized loan is 3.73%. The difference between them is that the subsidized loan is limited. It's up to $3,500 as of the total $5,500 in freshman year. And the subsidized portion means that the interest is not going to start to accrue until after graduation. The unsubsidized portion, it means that the moment that the funds are distributed on behalf of your student, they are going to start to accrue. They can get deferred until after graduation and included in your principal balance, but they are going to start to accrue from the moment those funds are distributed. Usually that's twice a year. Then there's the federal plus loans. That's the loan that I was saying earlier that the government, unless you've had a bankruptcy or a major financial blip that requires having, tax liens, et cetera, most families are eligible for federal plus loans and can borrow all the way up to the full cost of school. Right now, the rate is 6.28%. Now, for the student loans and the plus loan, the standard payment option is 10-year amortization, which begins 6 months after graduation. But there's a lot of flexibility. I mean, the students can have income repayment plans, and there's other ways to extend those payments over 20 years or, consolidate the loans with a different interest rate. So there's a lot of different options, much more flexible working with the government loans than it is working outside of the government loans. Some of the states have different programs, and then private programs, lots of different options. I mean, obviously there's banks, and sometimes the banks will even publish interest rates that are lower than the Federal Plus loans. But you should know that they dig a lot more deeply into your credit history and your ability to repay. And not everybody is going to be able to get that published interest rate. It might be something higher than that. And the repayment terms are not quite as flexible from some of the banks. There's other types of organizations too. Like I know of a very unique one. It was a bunch of Harvard grad students that created a business when they were going to grad school. They didn't love the plus loan rate that they had for grad students. And so they created a company where they basically pool student loans from across the country, and then they shop them around to banks to get the best rate possible. So there are some other places that you can borrow from as well. Okay, budgeting. When we're working with a family, every single family, no matter, even if you're, have huge amount of resources or very little resources, it is very important that people look and know what their monthly cash flow is. Happy to provide a detailed line item type of form for you to complete. But at the end of the day, you need to understand how much revenue is coming into your household on a monthly basis and how much is going out the door for expenses. Once you do that, you're going to be able to say, okay, this is how much I have to save for school at the end of the month. And if it's not enough, at least you'll be able to go back and look at all those line items and say, where do we have some room to maybe make some changes so that we can amp up the amount that we're saving for school? The second type of budget we're talking about, and I feel very strongly that every family should do this, is creating an annual college budget. So what do I mean by that? Every family needs to sit down and parents and figure out how much they are willing to save on behalf of their children and borrow, so that they know for every year of each of their kids' years in undergraduate degree, how much they are willing to borrow on behalf of and save for each child. So for instance, I had a partner a number of years ago. He and his wife sat down, they decided they were willing to save and borrow up to $30,000 for each child. They sat down and they had this conversation and said, basically, look, we will be able to provide $30,000 a year for you. If you go to a school that costs $30,000 or less, that is terrific. You'll not need to do another thing. But if you want to go to a school that costs more, and you very well may, likely want to attend one of those schools, you have to find a way to get tuition discounts, which is going to mean you got to work as hard as you can to do as best you can in school, and to identify schools that are going to be able to give you merit aid and to give our family need-based aid if we qualify. You also may need to take on the student loans that are made available to you. And in fact, this partner, one of their children went to a school that was about $32,000. So not much more was needed to be done. And then their daughter actually wound up getting some tuition discounts from that school for some merit aid. So it can work, but you really do want to set your expectations for the kids. There is nothing worse than I've seen than when families come in and their kids think that they have all the ability to apply any school they want to because their parents haven't sat down to discuss this with them. Now, I don't think that you have to share the nitty-gritty of your finances with them, but you should let them know that there's an expectation of how much you're able to give. Because again, they're going to find a school that's going to fit that requirement that's still going to be a great school for them. Okay, this is not a college plan, okay? Sticking your head in the sand, burying your head and feeling paralyzed because there's a lot of expenses coming down the pike for you, it shouldn't stop you dead in your tracks. Look, I've offered up the opportunity for you to set up in the chat room click on my calendar and set up an appointment with me or my colleagues to do some free college planning for you and do a consultation. Happy to do that. If you choose not to do that with us, that's okay too. But I really want you to take action. When you stop watching this Zoom call tonight, know that it's important to take some steps. There's an old Chinese proverb, and that is that when is the best time to plant a shade tree? And the answer is 20 years ago. But the second best time to plant a shade tree is today. And the same thing goes with college planning. Forget if you haven't done it in the past. Don't get stuck. Decide that you're going to take some action and start as best you can. Your plan may need to evolve over time, and that's okay, because as life changes, so too does the planning. But just start, because I'm telling you that families can save tens of thousands of dollars by starting sooner. Okay, talking about that, what is the actual cost of waiting? So the truth is that this is a $40,000 a year school. There's yearly contributions. Let's take a step back. Both families, family A on the left and family B on the right, they have a child that's in preschool. Family A decides to start contributing $8,000 a year. And by the time they get through senior year of college, they've saved about $120,000, but have been able to accumulate about $262,000, which was enough for their children to attend an undergraduate degree. Family B, however, puts it off, right? And they don't start saving until 8th grade, where they're starting to put away $21,500. They have to lay out about $193,000 to accumulate about $266,000. Now, this bar on the bottom is a little erroneous. Family A saved about $73,000 by starting to save sooner rather than later. Now, public school and private schools. Let's say you're a family that, wants to save about 75% for a public school for your children, and you have a 3-year-old. If you have a 3-year-old, you'd have to put away about $517 a year. But if you didn't start saving until your child was 12, you'd have to put away about $1,100 a month. $517 a month versus $1,100 a month. Now, if you wanted to save 100% of a private school and you have a 3-year-old, you'd have to put away about $1,500 a month versus, again, at age 12, where you'd have to put away close to $3,400 a month. So the moral of the story is start saving earlier. Think in terms of monthly savings rather than annual savings, and just get started saving. Because if you do put it off, the longer you wait, the more you're going to have to pay. All right, ways to fund school. We're about to talk about private scholarships, need-based aid, merit-based aid, and what really should you be thinking about when you're developing a full comprehensive college funding plan, okay? Let me just see if we have any questions in there yet. Okay, no. Okay, so private scholarships, what are they? Well, they're independent, non-college controlled gift aid. It's really coming from wealthy philanthropists, corporations, foundations, any type of employers, even country clubs. A lot of places will make private scholarships available. Now, if you want your kids to be thinking about this and trying to get some money to help cover the cost of school, I fully recommend that you sit down with your extended family members, all of you together, and make a list about all the organizations that everybody's been involved in. What religious organizations, what social organizations, what civic organizations, what ancestry, employers. Once you make that list, then everybody can start going back and inquiring as to whether private scholarships are made available for family members. Secondly, you never really have to pay anybody to give you a list of private scholarship opportunities. We have the internet at our fingertips. You can order many different books on Amazon or go to Barnes and Noble. Online kids, and we have some of these resources listed on our website, but FastWeb and scholarship.com, and Fannie Mae has a listing. College Board has some information about private scholarships. So great opportunity for your kids to go on. They're going to key in information that's important to them, things that they're involved in, how they identify, what interests they have, what sports, artistic capabilities, etc. May ask what type of leadership roles they've done, what type of community service, things like that. And basically they can get emails all day long with scholarship opportunities. However, many families ask kids to take on a lot of private scholarship applications at the very same time that these kids are trying to keep their grades up. They're studying for standardized tests. They're taking those exams. They're filling out applications for college. Many of those schools are requiring multiple essays. They're asking for lots of recommendations. There's a lot on their plates at the time when they're supposed to be applying for private scholarships. And the truth of the matter is that if only the kids spent as much time applying for private scholarships as they did identifying schools that would be more likely to give them the most amount of money, they'd be better off doing that. Because the truth is that only 1 in 8 students actually receive a scholarship or a bachelor's degree program. And very few are winning a free ride. Only 0.1% are going to receive $25,000 or more in scholarships. And 97% of scholarship recipients are actually going to receive $2,500 or less. Okay, so just keep it in mind. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't do a little bit of research and have kids try to apply for some private scholarships, but you could figure out a lot more coverage for the cost of school by identifying schools that would give you more money. Okay, now just to keep in mind, there are some schools that will reduce the financial aid award by the amount of private scholarships. So it's just something to keep in mind as well. Not all of them do, and some of them will reduce the loan offer before they do the scholarships and grants, but nonetheless, just something to keep in mind. Now, financial aid requirements, you have to apply starting senior year. Parents, you're going to apply for financial aid. Some people are under the impression that you only have to do that once. You have to do that every single year. And these financial aid deadlines that you cannot miss differ by school, and they differ by the type of application. There's 3 ways that students can apply to schools. Some schools offer something called early decision, which is a legally binding agreement. If you are hoping to compare different financial aid award letters from different schools, early decision is not going to be your best option because it's a commitment on your part to send your child to that school if they grant your child admissions, and you're going to hear from that school a lot sooner than you're going to hear from all the other schools. So just something to keep in mind. Early decision is usually in the early November timeframe. The admissions deadlines are usually November 1st, November 5th, or the 15th. And the financial aid deadlines are also very early, some of them as early November as well. Early action has that same type of deadlines. You have to check by school, but early action is not a legally binding agreement. It's just an indication that your child is willing to apply early because they're interested in the school and they want to hear sooner. And then regular decision admissions applications are usually early January to early February, and those financial aid deadlines will also be much later. Regardless of what your deadlines are, as soon as you are able to get your financial aid forms done, I recommend that you do. There are some schools that will give a larger amount of the financial aid in the earlier months. So not all schools, but some. So you do want to make sure that you get that in as early as possible. Something else to keep in mind, once you submit those documents, there are other requirements for parents. You often have to have your children getting onto each of the school's portals and seeing what follow-up requirements there are. You will be needing to upload your tax returns, and if you have business partnerships or your own businesses, those income tax returns are going to have to be submitted as well. There's sometimes student verification forms and other documents that the schools will require. So you have to make sure you get those in on time as well. Now, tax returns that are used are a 2-year look back period. If you have a senior, that means that you are going to be using the 2020 tax returns this year. Because think of it as the fall that your kids are applying to school. If your kids are going to be attending school in 2022, it's a 2-year look back period, okay? Now, why is that important to know? One, because you've got to make sure you get your tax returns done on time. Two, because you can sometimes influence how much income you're showing. Maybe you're going to sell some investments and you don't want it to show up on your tax return. Well, knowing the first year tax return is going to be important because maybe you'll sell your assets before that. Or maybe you can influence when an employer gives a bonus, things like that. Maybe you're going to sell a property and maybe you're going to hold off until after the last tax return that you're going to use for school. Now, there are two primary forms that have to be completed for financial aid. Every school requires something called the FAFSA. That's your government funding form. It stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Your kids are going to go to studentaid.gov. They're going to create what's called an FSAID, which is basically a username and password. And you're going to go in, you're going to complete that FAFSA form under their username because the questions are directed to your students. There are people that will charge a fee for you to fill out to help you fill out your financial aid forms. But for most people, you're able to do those forms pretty easily unless you have a very complicated situation. Most families can do that on their own. There is something called a data retrieval button that you can click on, which will download your tax returns to the FAFSA, and it will populate all of the income-based questions. Then there's a CSS profile form, which is offered by the College Board, and that is an institutional form, financial aid form. About 425 to 450 schools, mostly private schools, but a few of the large state, flagship schools will require this. It's in addition to the FAFSA, and it will dig a little more deeply into your finances. It will ask you to report many more assets than the FAFSA does. But just keep in mind that the schools that are using the profile form are schools that do ordinarily tend to have larger endowments and give larger financial aid packages. Therefore, they're asking for more information. So just know that you're going to have to do that. When your children are making the list of the schools that they're going to apply to, sit with them and go through the websites and make sure that you are creating some kind of spreadsheet or handwrite it out, however you want to do it, to list the admission deadlines and the financial aid deadlines and to know which forms each school is requiring. When you do the FAFSA, once you hit the submit button, it's going to calculate something called an expected family contribution. Now that is a little misleading because many people think, oh, that's the maximum amount that a school is going to expect me to pay. But the truth of the matter is that many families are required to pay more than their expected family contribution. For that reason, based on a new Simplification Act that was passed at the end of 2020, it's called the FAFSA Simplification Act, that down the road is going to start to be called a student aid index, okay, because this way it's not as misleading. Now, how do they currently derive the expected family contribution? Well, it's based on parent assets and income as well as student assets and income. And currently it also takes into consideration household size as well as the number of students that you have in college. So for instance, if you have a $50,000 expected family contribution, but 2 kids are going to overlap in college, in those overlap years, they split that by 2. So it's really only $25,000 for each child. I'm not going to cover it off tonight, but as part of that Simplification Act that was passed in 2020, there are some changes that were approved for the financial aid system that are going to take effect starting in 2023 to 2024. And some of those have now been pushed off a little bit later. But one in particular is that they've taken away the number of children in college so that expected family contribution won't get split. All I can tell you is there is a lot of lobbying and petitioning going on, and you can sign petitions for it to have that reversed. So I'm very hopeful that they will do that. But when we're working with families, we will always be keeping you up to speed on any of the changes that are going to go into effect. Now, how does this expected family contribution work? So first, you're figuring out the cost of attendance, which is as you can see on the yellow bar as an example on the bottom, if a school costs $55,000 and you subtract out your expected family contribution, let's say it's about $30,000, then you're going to have a demonstrated need of $25,000. Now, I'm just showing you this. This is called a student aid report. Many families don't realize that they can print up the student aid report when they submit the FAFSA. You can always go back in and print this up later, but it's hard to see where the EFC is. And it's because it looks like a serial number. Where the yellow arrow is in the middle of the page is where you're going to find your EFC. This is really a $7,912 expected family contribution. Now, it's not enough to just know the cost of school. It's the starting point, right? The full-on cost of school. And then you want to have an estimate of what your expected family contribution is going to be, or your actual EFC. Now, before I even go on with that thought, I do want to tell you that each school is required to do something to provide something on their websites called a net price calculator. So you are always, have the opportunity to go onto any school and to use the net price calculator. And based on the inputs that they require, they're going to give you an estimate of what school would likely cost you. Now, that won't necessarily include merit aid, although some of the schools will actually ask as part of their net price calculator what your child's GPA or standardized test scores are. But most is just on the financial side. You can also go to FAFSA Forecaster, the number 4, to do a little estimate of what your EFC is long in advance of actually submitting the form. And that's, a number of different ways. We obviously, when we're working with people, always give an estimated expected family contribution based on the assets and income that you have. Now, it's, again, not enough to know what your expected family contribution and demonstrated need is. You now have to identify, and this is a really important part, that you have to find the schools that are going to be more likely to help meet your demonstrated need. Not all schools are alike. Some schools give very little in aid, while others give a lot. So how do you find that? Well, first of all, you can obviously go to the websites and you can ask information at these info sessions. But very often the answer you're going to hear are things like, we give a lot of financial aid, you should definitely apply. But you're not going to have a really good sense of it. So there's a couple of places you can look. You can always key into the search bar on the internet, common data set, and then the name of any college or university. And you're going to get a whole lot of information about statistics about how they distribute funds for need-based aid and merit-based aid. The other place that I like to go to is, again, College Board. Back on that page where we were looking at the cost, once you're looking at the prices of the schools, on the top of the page is something called financial aid by numbers. And I love this because it gives a good sense of how generous a school is. So when your kids are looking, you're going to know if that school is going to be likely to help meet your demonstrated need or not. So first off, I want to draw your attention to the middle of this screen at the center on the top. This is 98%. The school that I'm using here as an example is a somewhat elite private school, and they claim to meet 98% of all demonstrated need through the applications. Now, you want 100% or as close to 100% as possible. Will all private schools look like this? No, a lot will, but a lot will be in the 60 to 70% range, even lower. Public schools, very low in terms of percent of demonstrated need. So you want to make sure that you're looking at the schools and seeing, okay, which schools give a lot of money based on people's demonstrated need. Then I want to draw your attention over to the left-hand side of the screen, this pie chart where it says financial aid distribution. In this case, we want as large a piece of the pie to be the green, which is the scholarships and grants. That's the free money, doesn't have to get repaid. So you want as close to 100% as possible in the scholarships and grants. Are there some schools that give 100% in scholarships and grants? Yes. Vanderbilt University is an example. They're a no loan school. That's terrific. Some schools, will be in the, 70 to 80%, even 90% range. Fantastic. Now, the blue part of the pie are student loans and college work study. College work studies usually range from about $1,500 to $3,000. It's not money that's just given to you. It's money that your child can earn on campus by earning an hourly wage at one of the jobs. And they won't just because they work doesn't mean they're getting the full amount. They're going to give them up to that amount, however many hours they're working. I'm a big advocate of students working on campus. Maybe they, make a couple of $1,000s. That's terrific. I don't see a lot of kids sending money home to help with tuition, but it's money that they can use for spending. And then it's a little less money that you're going to have to contribute. Now, also here for most of the schools, the College Board will show you what the average first-year financial aid package is, including grants, scholarships, and work study and loans. And then on the right-hand side, on the bottom, I love this area because it really tells you how much a school is giving in terms of, are they more of a merit-based school or more of a need-based school? So in this case, the average need-based loan was $3,400. The average need-based scholarship or grant award, again, the free money, was close to $49,000. And the average non-need-based aid was about $10,000. So from this school, like this is a school that is more generous on the need-based side than the merit-based side, but at least you can have a sense of what your child might be able to get. Now, components of the college funding process: determining that real budget, understanding the costs, determining if you're eligible for financial aid. So I know, we have some people on tonight that have, kids that are seniors, but some people that may be watching this at some point are going to have younger children. And that's okay, because you can do estimates of how much aid you're going to be eligible for, and then try to get a sense of how much you're going to need to come up with. Now, we're about to cover a lot of information on these next slides, but I want you to know that how you save, where you save, and when you save makes a huge difference, not only in how much money you're going to have available for your kids by the time they go to school, but also how eligible you are going to be for aid. Okay, it's going to make sense in a moment. And if you are working with somebody that claims that they are a college advisor and they do financial planning for students in college and parents, you got to make sure that they're looking in all of these different areas and looking very comprehensively at your goals. You want to work with somebody that really understands the college financial aid process so that you can learn how to maximize aid. You also want to know how to access funds without penalty. Far too often, families are locked up in some of those places we talked about earlier where it's not so easy to get to. 401ks, for instance, right? If you wanted to get access to your 401ks, some plans limit how much you can take out. And if you are able to get to some of those funds, you're going to first have to pay your income taxes because you haven't paid that yet. And if you're younger than 59 and a half, you're going to have to pay a 10% penalty. Okay. Now, sometimes some of your employers will allow you to borrow against your 401ks, but it's usually only up to around $50,000. And you have to pay an interest rate to do that. And then you have to pay it back. So just keep it in mind when you're working with somebody and they're telling you how to save and where to save. Also, protection against market risk. Again, you want to make sure that some of your portfolio is protected, a good amount of funds, so that you don't get caught up in a situation where if the market takes a big correction right before your kids are going to school or during the time that they're in school, that a family is going to get hurt. Look at opportunities to save tax-free. And then also, how do you minimize the amount of debt that you take on? But here's the most important. Look, a lot of families will have to borrow. They just will. But it's okay, provided that your college plan shows you a way to pay that back. Okay, because nothing worse than seeing families that are burdened with an undergraduate degree. Okay, how do you calculate the need? How do you figure out the expected family contribution? So as I mentioned, it's based on a formula of income and asset. Parent income is going to range from about 22% to 47% of adjusted gross income. most families that I see tend to be in the 22 to 30% range, but there is no income limit in terms of making you ineligible for aid. So, definitely families that are thinking that, oh, I make too much money or I have too many assets, I'm not going to even bother to apply. I absolutely recommend that you do, because many families, it's been proven, leave a lot of money on the table that they would have been eligible for, but because they thought they weren't going to be eligible, they didn't even bother to apply. Student income is at a penalty, 50% toward the formula, but that's if they earn income over $6,000. Now, many of you may be thinking like, oh my God, if only my kids made $6,000 a year. But some students do. They have a great summer job, or they're working consistently throughout the year. Maybe they have a paid internship. Maybe you have investments in their name and they sell those investments. Maybe they're showing income because somebody has given them money out of a 529. So there's a number of things that could contribute to that. 50% is going to go toward the expected family contribution. And then there's parent assets and student assets. Parent assets are, after an asset protection allowance, going to come into play at about 5.64%. Student assets, on the other hand, is a significant penalty, 20%. So just imagine you have a $30,000 investment in a student's name, and that's going to mean that about $6,000 a year goes toward that expected family contribution formula. Now, $6,000 for 4 years of their undergraduate degree is going to mean $24,000 of that one $30,000 investment should be considered to be handed over, right? Just imagine now that $30,000 investment was now in a parent asset instead. That would only be considered at 5.64%, less than $1,700. Now, that's obviously better. But what if there were assets in which you could invest in that didn't have to get declared on financial aid forms? That would be even better, because that $30,000 asset wouldn't have to be declared at all. Now, I'm not suggesting that people watch this Zoom presentation and get off of it and start moving assets around and selling things and moving things in and out of other people's names without some advice from a professional who knows what they're doing and understands the financial aid system as well as taxation. But I do want you to understand that where you save and how you save can influence how eligible you will be for aid. So what assets are included and excluded in the FAFSA? Included are your stocks and bonds, your brokerage accounts like your mutual funds, checking accounts, savings accounts, CDs, money market, 529s. Remember, we talked about the fact that 529s get declared. I want to make something very clear. 529s are declared as a parent asset. A parent asset is only at 5.64%. Your children might be the beneficiary of those 529s, but you can't make that mistake and put it in a student name for your financial aid purposes, okay? That'll hurt. So please declare them as 529s. The parents, regardless of which children they have it saved for, the full 529 amount will get reported, but at a much lower amount. Other real estate. Why do I say other real estate? Because the FAFSA does not require you to include the equity in your primary residence on the FAFSA. The profile form will ask that information, but not the FAFSA. The other real estate they are interested in are, vacation homes or investment properties, whether you have, a home or even a residential or commercial building that you're holding as an investment. If you're taking rental income, any of that, that's going to get reported. And then UTMA and UGMA accounts, those are custodial accounts, those get reported, as do irrevocable trusts. Even if trusts for your family or for your children, if that money is not going to be available to your children while they are in school, they still have to get reported. What gets excluded are those qualified retirement funds, traditional and Roth IRAs, 401ks, 457s, 403bs, SEP plans, pensions, annuities that are qualified retirement funds, the life insurance values. Remember earlier I mentioned that the cash value inside permanent life insurance plans get excluded not only from the FAFSA, but from the profile form as well. Home equity, again, primary residence is going to get excluded. And then family-owned business. If you have a family-owned business and you have, you meet these two criteria. You own 50% or more of that business, and you have less than 100 employees, then you can exclude it from the FAFSA. However, all business affiliations are going to be reported on the profile form. And then personal property. This is an area that people make a lot of mistakes in. Things like artwork, collectibles, furniture, jewelry, cars, that is going to all get excluded from the FAFSA. Now, this is just a quick chart to show that assets and income, how they play an impact in terms of expected family contribution. A family that has $200,000 in parent assets, one child in school, and they earn a combined income of $150,000 is going to have about a $43,000 expected family contribution. But as you can see, if you have less assets and more income right now, let's say $225,000 in income, but only $25,000 in assets, your expected family contribution is going to be about $57,000. And now, again, there are some changes coming that might influence that, and we might see a little bit more of the EFC moving toward assets versus income, but we'll know more as we approach that date. Now, regardless of whether you are eligible for need-based aid or not, every family, every child, every student can be eligible for merit aid if the right schools are chosen. Your kids don't have to be the valedictorian of the class or in the top decile of their high school ranking in order to be eligible for merit aid. So what is merit aid? It's a term for grants, scholarships, and tuition discounts that a school is going to, provide to a student in order to provide an incentive for them to join their student body, right? Now, because this is their own money, they get to decide what the criteria is, and that will differ by school. Merit aid is not based on financial need, but some schools will use it as a secondary factor. So food for thought, even if you're not going to be eligible for need-based aid, sometimes it does make sense to apply, even if you're just hoping for the merit aid. Now, before we even go on further, I do want to say that some schools will offer merit aid just based on the application and nothing else needs to get done. But there are other scholarships and grants that are often available at schools that do require additional applications and deadlines and essays, et cetera. So just want to make sure when you're looking at certain schools, go to the financial aid part of the website and learn about what their merit aid requirements are, and as well as what those deadlines are, okay? Now, very often, every school is going to make a large part of the merit aid based on academic achievement. So, the GPA that your students have achieved, as well as standardized test scores if the schools are looking at those. But they'll also look at athletic or music ability and even leadership things that people have done in the community and base that on as well.
Jody?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're going to have to call it an evening.
Okay, great. No problem.
The library's closing.
Yes.
No
worries.
I want to save the Zoom to my phone.
Yes, no problem. I'm just for the last thing, just anybody that's watching this can feel free to call me and we can go over the rest to talk about the what goes into finding merit scholarships. Okay, so I'm just going to pop this up there again because there's a lot of different ways, and I offer that up to anybody that's watching to call me. I can answer questions directly. Always happy to set up time to help families figure out need-based aid and merit-based aid, as well as what goes into a plan. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you so much. It was so nice. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.